conference championship race is heating up in college football. In this video, I'm going to be going over all the Power 4 scenarios for conference championship races that it currently sits right now going into Week 10. Last week was a really big week for a lot of teams, namely BYU, as a first time as an underdog in over a month and a half, covered against UCF. They remained 8-0. Penn State had a big road win at night against Wisconsin, a surging Wisconsin team. They moved to 7-0. Oregon absolutely obliterated Illinois, even as a 3-touchdown favorite. They look like one of the best teams, if not the best team in football right now. Alabama, after not covering for 3 straight games, destroyed Missouri 34-0, and they remain in the CFP hunt. And finally, Texas A&M, one of the most surprising teams, especially since Week 1 lost in Notre Dame. They destroyed LSU in the second half, and they moved to 7-1 and 5-0, undefeated in the SEC right now. I'll start with the SEC, the conference breakdown as it sits. And you see at the top there, Texas A&M 5-0, the only undefeated team in the SEC. Right now, we're going to eliminate Oklahoma, Auburn, Kentucky, Mississippi State. They mathematically cannot get to the SEC championship game. Now, the rest of these teams in orange, they're going to eliminate themselves in the coming weeks. I do believe Ole Miss will stay in contention, but I don't think they're going to be a main factor. They still have to play Georgia coming up here soon. So the 6 teams, there's still have a chance to make it. Alabama and LSU, these 2 teams play in 2 weeks. This will basically be an elimination game from the playoff. Whoever loses this game is basically done. Even at 9-3, tougher strength of schedule, no. The loser of this game is out of the playoff. They're not going to get in. So each team, whoever wins this, probably will win out the rest of their games. LSU has Florida, Vandy, and Oklahoma, while Alabama has Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn. So I think both those teams will win the rest of those games. But I do believe Alabama has a better chance of winning this. But the team that wins it will probably be one of the last 4 teams in the playoff right now. Another big game that's coming up in a few weeks, Georgia hosting Tennessee. Both teams control their own destiny to get to the SEC championship game. Tennessee wins out, they play. Georgia wins out, they play the championship game. This will easily be each team's hardest game. As you see, Tennessee, one of the easier remaining strength of schedule. They're 66, even while playing Georgia, the number 1 rated, power-rated team. They still have one of the weakest schedules remaining in Power 4 as it sits right now. So I think Georgia has a much better chance of winning, especially if they're the home team. At Tennessee, though, at 10-2, only losses would be to Arkansas and Georgia. I think they would have a legit chance of being one of the last 4 teams in the playoff, even with that result. And finally, a game that's shaping up to be one of the biggest in the state of Texas in, I'd say, the last 25 years. A&M taking on Texas last week of the season. It's not a gimme that both these teams will make it to this game unscathed the rest of the way, but it sure suits out well for both teams. Texas A&M's at South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn. That seems to be a pretty easy road for them. While Texas has Florida, Arkansas, and Kentucky. I mean, Arkansas has played a spoiler already. Kentucky almost beat Georgia, and Florida is doing a lot better than most people thought. So that game, the last week of the season, I think, even if Texas A&M comes to that game 10-1, I think they're basically a shoo-in for the playoff. They beat a really good LSU team, and I think their schedule, even though it's a bit weaker, I think they did enough in the regular season. While Texas, I do believe, if they beat Texas A&M, they probably will face rematch Georgia in the SEC championship game, where I think they would beat them. And obviously, if they win the SEC, they get a first-round bye into the playoff. Going into the ACC now, Clemson, Miami, SMU, and Pittsburgh are the 4 undefeated teams in conference. Stanford, Florida State, Cal are mathematically eliminated at this point. I don't believe any of the other teams listed, besides Virginia Tech, even have a chance. But I'm going to go over the 4 teams I think have the biggest chance of getting to the ACC championship game. Pittsburgh and SMU. After what seemed like early season bad loss to BYU, SMU has rebounded nicely. They play each other here this week, so this will be an elimination game. Honestly, even though Pitt is undefeated, their strength of schedule has been really weak. That's kind of the scenario for most ACC teams, resume-wise. To me, that'll basically be an elimination game. Whoever loses that is basically out. Even if Pitt were to go 11-1, I don't see them beating. I don't see them losing to SMU and then beating Clemson or Louisville. So I think they're going to have a tough road ahead of them. They would probably finish 10-2 at best. They would be the next 4 out. SMU, though, I think they run the table. They were pretty easy. Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. But I even think at 11-1, I don't think they would get the nod especially if BYU gets to 11 wins and gets to the Big 12 championship. I think they would choose BYU or SMU. That's just my opinion. And I think the two teams that everybody is saying will be in the ACC right now, Clemson and Miami. I think both teams get to at least 11 wins going into the championship game. I think Miami actually finishes 12-0, but they would lose to Clemson, who I think would finish 12-1, no losses in the ACC, and they would get that first round bye. This is going to be an epic game. Just like whoever the SEC matchup is, this ACC championship game is going to be absolutely crazy if it comes down to Miami and Clemson. This will be a top 5, probably, or top 10, probably top 8 matchup at worst going in. So that'll be a crazy matchup to watch going into this. The Big 12, one of the probably the most wide open Power 4 conference right now. BYU and Iowa State undefeated. Kansas State and Colorado only have 1 loss. So a bunch of these teams are already eliminated. Oklahoma State, Utah, who I thought would be a preseason pick to be in the championship game, they're already eliminated. No chance they're getting in. West Virginia, TCU, Arizona State, I think will eliminate themselves in the coming weeks. Cincinnati, Texas Tech, theoretically have an outside chance, but I don't think they're going to make it, as you'll see here in the next 2 slides. With the 4 teams, I think might have a chance. Colorado, Kansas State. Colorado already lost to Kansas State head-to-head, but that was their only loss in conference so far, where Kansas State lost to BYU, and I think they have an outside chance of maybe losing 1, possibly 2 more games, especially against Arizona State and Cincinnati, besides Iowa State. Well, Colorado, they have a 53rd remaining strength of schedule. That toughest game they play right now is at Texas Tech, so they get a bye this week, then go on the road to Texas Tech. They finish out the last 3 games at home, so I still think they lose at least 1 more game, and they would totally miss the playoffs, not even be in the first 4 or next 4 out, so that 13 to 20 range, I think they fit right be around that 20 to 25 range, but I think they still finish 9 wins. Kansas State as well, I think they lose 1 more game. I think they're basically done. The Big 12 is just going to cannibalize each other, and I think with only 2 losses, they still wouldn't be good enough for the resume builder. I think now the 2 teams I think will be in the Big 12 championship game will be BYU and Iowa State, the 2 undefeated teams. Iowa State, I think, would drop. Even though how bad Utah's playing, that game's gonna be on the road late in the season. Kyle Whittingham knows what it takes to beat good teams at the right time, and I think that would probably be the biggest chance of losing. If not, then the last week of the season against Kansas State, but they would have done enough to get in the championship game by then. BYU, I think, at least loses another. It could be the Utah, or it could be the Arizona State, both on the road. But I think these 2 would be in the Big 12 championship game, and I think Iowa State would come out on top. They would finish 12-1. BYU 11-2. Like I said earlier, if it comes down 11-2 BYU, 11-1 SMU, BYU would have played a stronger strength of schedule. They would have made a championship game, and they would have beat SMU head-to-head. That's why I think they would get the nod, be one of the last 4 teams in, while Iowa State gets their first round bye. Finally, the Big 10 race right now. Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State are the top 4 teams. Teams like Rutgers and Maryland and Southern Cal had absolutely no chance of getting in. While other teams like Wisconsin, Michigan, even Iowa, and even Illinois, they're going to eliminate themselves. Yeah, they have a legit chance, obviously, but the top 4 teams would need to lose at least 2 games. But Penn State and Oregon would need to lose at least 3 games apiece for Illinois to get in the championship game. So that's why it's coming down to these 4 teams right now in the end. Penn State, Indiana, both undefeated. Penn State takes on Ohio State at home this week. One of the top 3 most important regular season games for this entire college football season. Even if they come away with a loss, the rest of their schedule, I mean, look at it. Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota, and Maryland. None of those teams have a winning record right now. So I think it'll be a easy playoff spot for them. I mean, they could drop one of those easy games and then might eliminate themselves. But in the end, at 11-1 Penn State team with decent wins over Wisconsin and West Virginia, I think they would do enough to not only get in, but get a home game in their first round playoff spot. Indiana, even though they're undefeated, going into last week's game, they had 120th rated strength of schedule heading in to the game against Washington. I'm sure it didn't improve too much. That just shows how weak their schedule's been. They're still a great team, but their schedule's just been really weak, and they play the bulk of their schedule down the stretch. And I think they lose at least 2 games, whether that's the Michigan State this week on the road, Michigan in a couple weeks who looked a lot better against Sparty, or the game on the road at Ohio State. I think there's no way they come away with a victory in that one. That's at least 1 loss, if not 2. And I think at 10-2, Indiana would be miss the playoffs to be one of the next 4 teams out. They finished between 16 and 20, in my opinion, and just miss out. Still would be a fantastic year for the Hoosiers. But the 2 teams I think will be in the Big Ten championship game will be Oregon and Ohio State. It'll be a Big Ten game rematch. I think Oregon will drop a game, whether it's this week at Michigan. Again, they're a 14-point favorite, but anything can happen. Or on the road at Wisconsin, or last week of the season, their biggest rival, Washington. I think they drop at least one of those games. Meanwhile, Ohio State, I think they're going to beat Penn State, and then easy road against Purdue, Northwestern Indiana, before they finally, after a 5-year stretch of not beating them, beat Michigan, get back to that game. And I think Oregon ultimately wins the game, though, in the end. And they would obviously get one of the first round byes. But Ohio State, even at 11-2, would probably be a 7 or 8 seed and get a home playoff game in the playoffs. And again, they'd be one of the best at-large teams going into the playoff, even though they lost in the Big Ten championship game.